Sometimes we need a story more than we need food. Food keeps us alive, but stories teach us how and why to live. So from earliest childhood, we want to know, where do we come from? Where are we going? How can I be happy? What is happiness? How can I be successful? How can I avoid being a villain? How can I be a spiritual servant? And so in a sense, you could say life is a dramatic question. You are a dramatic question. And if you don't answer that dramatic question, the world will answer it for you. And then instead of having your own story, you'll be in someone else's story. So before bed, children like to hear a story because they want solutions to these questions. We like to be the first to share news because we love stories. We like to hear breaking news. We go to the movies for story, not to hear a story as much as to feel a story. We want these methods and ideas about resolving conflicts to be shown to us, but we want to really feel the dramatic answer. So stories are examples, they're not instructions. If you're really hungry, you want a good meal. You don't want a menu. So stories are more about the heart than the head. That's the first thing I want to tell you today. That stories are more about emotion than they are about the intellect. So I'm going to mention 3 essential aspects of stories today, and that's the first. Heart more so than head. So for example, I could tell you the facts that the king died and the queen died. But if I tell you that the queen died and then the king died of a broken heart, I will have told you a story. The same facts. But notice how it's become a story. First of all, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Stories don't have to be long. There's an implied beginning of 2 people falling in love. There's an implied middle, that they had a happy life together. And of course, the story then becomes, in this case, the ending. But what I want you to see in terms of what a story is that it's the pacing and placing of facts in an emotional context. And that's how it's different from simply giving someone the facts. So you remember stories that touch your heart. In fact, the best speakers you've ever heard have been people that have spoken from the heart rather than simply lecturing to you intellectually. A story might frighten you or they might inspire you, but it will be an emotional experience. So that's the first essential, from the heart. The second thing is that life sometimes seems like an endless flow of time. It can seem boring, it can seem endless, it can frighten us. What will happen? And so the creation of stories is the giving of a beginning, a middle, and an end to time. So those are 3 aspects to every story, as I indicated with the king and the queen. So we have to put a beginning, a middle, and an end on a story to give it meaning, to slow down time, so to speak, and to give a little meaning to the dramatic questions of life. Now, the third aspect of storytelling is that all stories are about conflict. Think of all movies that you've been to. Somebody wants something that she or he doesn't have, and they feel that that will make them content or happy. They don't have money, they don't have food, they don't have love, they don't have acceptance, they don't have recognition or education or community, and they want it. So there's a conflict. Now, why are stories about conflict? Because life is about conflict. All our lives are about conflict. Not having things that we need or that we want. Now, even if you're the smartest, richest, most popular person with the greatest intelligence and the best parents, and you have all the opportunities and privilege in the world, you still have one essential conflict you can't avoid. You're going to die. So the conflict between life and death is always there. And that's one of the things that makes us want to know the answers to these dramatic questions. In fact, as Baha'is, we know that death isn't even the worst that can happen. We know that spiritual death is even worse. When we're told someone has perished spiritually. So that's an incredible story, and that's not a story we hear too often about. So when we're thinking about what kinds of stories to tell, that might be one to consider. Now that leads us to what it is you want to tell stories about. Well, the first thing I want to say is don't should on yourself. Don't feel like you should tell this kind of a story or that kind of a story. I want you to tell your story. And what I mean by that is I want you to have a journal. And in that journal, to jot down different conflicts that you have felt or experienced. Whether they're conflicts like walking into a store and you're followed by the security guard because you're brown or black. Whether it's a teacher that perhaps didn't believe that you really wrote that paper. A conflict with your parents. Make a list of these conflicts, and then you can create fictional situations and characters for those conflicts. In that journal, I suggest that you also make a list of characters. We all have met people that have been warnings to us, how not to be, or they've been inspirational examples to us. So make a list of some of those characters. Maybe your grandparents are some of those characters. And then make a list of events or incidents that have struck you in life. A time when perhaps someone may have died that you cared about, or someone betrayed you, or you failed a test. Make a list of those incidents. And then I encourage you to not be afraid of what keeps you awake at night, because that's going to make the best story. You want to go deep into your feelings and be authentic. Now, the safety valve there in being vulnerable, in making a list of these very, very personal feelings, is that you're going to fictionalize your stories. So take The Lion King, for example. That's about a family, and that's where most of our stories come from. And maybe there was greed and jealousy and hope and pride in that family. But the writer decided to create it in a fictional situation. So your stories don't even have to be about people. They could be about animals, as in the case of The Lion King. So all is possible. The only thing I ask you not to do with the journal is make rules. It's not about getting it right. It's about getting it written. So remember, you're a dramatic question. And if you don't answer it, someone else will. So the final words I'd like to say is that stories can uplift or stories can discourage. People who like to gossip also like storytelling. But that's an example of storytelling that does more harm than healing. So we also want to ask ourselves, what do we want to do? What effect do we want our stories to have? That doesn't mean you can't write sad stories or about bad people, but you just have to examine later on, what is your intent? What is your goal with this story? So, let me leave you with remembering that if stories come to you, give them away, because it may save somebody else's life.